Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Larry's Trackside Teaser. Every single week, I preview the upcoming NASCAR weekend. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, I would appreciate a like, comment, follow, subscribe, do whatever you need to do. Share it if you want to, for all I care. Do whatever you need to do. But this week, we preview Kansas Speedway, a great racetrack, puts on great racing. We've seen some fantastic finishes over the last couple of years. Probably been the best track, arguably the best track. I think most probably actually say Charlotte. But I think it's in the conversation for the best track with this generation of the Cup car. So, of course, we'll go through the schedule. We'll go through the facts. We'll go through potential weather. It looks like it could be really windy this weekend. Go through some favorites, underdogs, our picks. But before we do all of that, I, of course, need to go through my updated power rankings post Bristol Motor Speedway. So we actually had all three series in action at Bristol. So I was actually able to make some moves on each of these power rankings. Let's start with the Craftsman Truck Series. The power rankings look a little bit different. We have Caden Honeycutt at the top of this list. Potentially could have competed for the win if the incident didn't happen with Eckes still looking for that first career victory. In second, I have Eckes, who's arguably, well, not arguably, he has been the best looking driver over the last couple weeks, but is yet to get to victory lane. Came pretty close this past weekend in Bristol, though. And then we have Chandler Smith, who has a lot higher of an average finish, who's third in my power rankings, has an 18.33, but I do take into account that he would have gotten a top 5 finish at the Rock if he hadn't failed post-race inspection. So I do keep that in mind when I did it for him. And also, he's had a great season. He's led the points pretty much all year. He's back in the points lead right now, so it makes sense for him to be third here. We got Gio Ruggiero and then Jake Garcia making his first appearance onto the power rankings in fifth. We move over to the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, where Justin Allgaier continues to just put in great run after great run, averaging slightly above a second place finish over the last 3 races with a 2.66. And of course, he has 1 win over the last 3 races and then 3 wins on the year as a whole. And if Justin Allgaier wasn't kicking as much ass as he's been doing all season long, Sheldon Creed would be first in the power rankings because he's been fantastic. He's racing around 5th every single week. He's competitive every single week. He's averaging a 4th place finish over the last 3 races. Third in my O'Reilly Series power rankings is Corey Day, who just continues to get these top 10s every single week. William Sawalich, arguably the hot hand right now, won at Rockingham, got his first career victory. Honestly looked really strong at Bristol, leading the early portions of this race. Ended up getting 7th place, another top 10 for Sawalich. And then Retzloff continues to run anywhere between like 7th and 12th every week. He's very competitive. He's really punching above what he's supposed to be really doing right now. It's been really impressive. You can make the argument that Retzloff should be 4th or maybe even 3rd on these power rankings just because he's way overperforming at the moment. And then we look at the NASCAR Cup Series, where it could be more controversial. I have Ty Gibbs jumping up to the top of my board. Ty Gibbs is finishing top 5 or just outside the top 5 every single week. He's the hot hand right now, gets his first victory at Bristol. Tyler Reddick has still done really well. I think he hasn't done as great over the last couple of weeks as he started off the year, but obviously he's still doing fantastic. He won at Darlington, got a 4th this past weekend, so he's obviously still doing fantastic. Denny Hamlin honestly hasn't looked as strong as I thought he would over the last couple of weeks. Wouldn't say he's been bad. He's still running in the top 10, top 5. But I thought with both Martinsville and then this past weekend as well at Bristol that he'd be more competing for the win than he was in those races. And then we look at Ryan Blaney, who arguably should probably be higher up on these power rankings, but he hasn't been able to get the win. His team hasn't looked all that great. His pit crew has looked pretty awful. I got him 4th in the power rankings. And then Chase Elliott just barely hangs on to that 5th spot. He does have the win under his belt over the last 3 races, but he honestly didn't look that good this week. Didn't look all that competitive. All right, now that I've gone through my updated power rankings, let's go through the weekend schedule, the weekend facts, and then take a look at the weather. Once again, NASCAR is kind of confusing me with their schedule a little bit. We have O'Reilly Series practice and qualifying on Friday, but starting at 7 p.m., so night practice, night qualifying at Kansas. I find that quite interesting. So Friday on the CW app, starting at 7 p.m., we have O'Reilly Series practice, immediately followed by qualifying. And then we look ahead to Saturday at 12:30 p.m. We have the Tide 150 for the ARCA Menards Series on Fox Sports 1. Cletus McFarland and his cameraman, Squirrel McNutt, a.k.a. George Siciliano, and then, of course, Cletus McFarland, a.k.a. Garrett Mitchell, are both going to be in the field. So I'm very interested to see how they do. At 4 p.m., we have Cup Series practice, immediately followed by Cup Series qualifying on Prime Video. And then at 7 p.m. on Saturday, we have the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race, the Kansas Lottery 300 on the CW. And then we move over to Sunday at 2 p.m. We have the Advent Health 400 on Fox. Now that we're done with the schedule, let's move on to the facts and the weather. The Cup Series race for this weekend is the Advent Health 400. The stages end at lap 80 for stage 1, 165 for stage 2, and it's a 267 lap event. Of course, Kansas Speedway, located in Kansas City, Kansas, not Kansas City, Missouri. The track length is 1.5 miles, and it is a tri-oval speedway. It opened up this century, actually, in 2001. The first race was in that year on September 30th, and it was won by Jeff Gordon. The active win leader at Kansas Speedway is Denny Hamlin. And then last year's winners in the spring, we had Kyle Larson. And then, of course, we had Chase Elliott win in the fall after Denny and Bubba Wallace making contact on the last lap. The notable entries we have for the weekend, of course, the Truck Series is off this weekend. In the O'Reilly Series, we have Cole Custer driving the number 0, and then we have William Byron making another start in the number 88. And then in the NASCAR Cup Series, I'm very excited to see how he does this weekend. We have Corey Heim in the 67 for 2311 Racing. Then I am recording this on very early Tuesday morning. On Friday, it looks like we're going to potentially get thunderstorms and heavy wind throughout the weekend. Over 20 miles per hour winds on Friday, 15 miles per hour winds on Saturday, and around 10 miles per hour winds on Sunday. But on Friday night, it looks like we could potentially get some thunderstorms. So there is a possibility that O'Reilly Series practice and qualifying gets rained out for Kansas. We look to Saturday, where right now it says 10% chance of rain, and completely different on the temperatures. On Friday, 82 degrees is the high. Saturday, 60 degrees as the high, which could kind of make sense in why we're getting those thunderstorms on Friday evening potentially. But on Saturday, around race time, I would expect for it to be around 50 degrees potentially. Maybe a little cooler, maybe a little warmer. Honestly, pretty cool for Kansas Speedway if that ends up being the case. And then Sunday, it looks like it's going to be sunny. The high is 67 degrees. The low is 45 degrees. And I'm expecting around race time for it to be around that high. So 65 degrees plus once we get down to the Cup Series race on Sunday. All right, now that we're done with all that, let me give some thoughts on Kansas Speedway. And then, of course, I'll go through some favorites, some potential underdogs, then my weekend picks for the Cup Series and the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. Kansas Speedway, I said it a little bit earlier, it's arguably the best racing that we see with this generation of car at a single racetrack. I think Charlotte is probably the best, but I would give Kansas probably that second place position. I think Chicagoland's going to put on a barn burner this year, though with them going back there. But nonetheless, Kansas has put on some really good racing. I expect some long green flag runs. One thing I like about Kansas, it's a multi-groove racetrack, so some drivers are going to be more successful on the bottom. But from what I've noticed with this racetrack, the high side is the place you really want to be. It seems like that's the stronger part of the racetrack. If you're really good up there, like a Kyle Larson, like Christopher Bell, like Tyler Reddick, like some of these drivers that are able to run right up against the wall, I think you're going to have a lot of success. So those are obviously going to be some drivers in my favorites for sure. But I'm really looking forward to Kansas. I like the racing that we have at Kansas. I wouldn't say we have a lot of tire fall off at Kansas. I would say that's one of the notes that I would have for it. Oh, it doesn't have the best tire fall off, but I know that Goodyear is always working on it. Honestly, with this past weekend in Bristol, they didn't do a great job. Goodyear didn't have a good weekend, but not every week is going to hit 100%. So I know they're working on getting those tires softer and softer and providing more fall off for these tires. So maybe we will see a good amount of fall off. But even if we don't see a good amount of fall off, we've seen at Kansas, we still have the comers and goers to a certain degree. We have great racing because of it being a multi-groove racetrack. It being a multi-groove racetrack, it really helps. It really helps with this generation of car, because when certain places heat up on the racetrack or more rubber gets built into more places, people move around. People move around throughout the day. At some points in the day, the bottom lane might be the more powerful lane, but once that high lane is the most powerful lane, I think it's going to be really tough to beat a driver that can run that high lane. As long as that driver is really good at the high lane and doesn't make that's one thing. If you run the high lane, you make mistakes, you're in the wall. And that's why some people aren't necessarily that great at running the high lane, and some people are scared to run all the way up against the wall. They'll run like a half a car length down or like a full car length down. They won't get right up against the wall. But that's one of the reasons why we also see drivers like Larson and Reddick and Bell make so many mistakes, because they're on the edge. They're right up there against the wall. So whoever's able to run that wall in the last stage of this race really well, I think they're probably going to be your victor in this thing. I think the pit crew is going to really matter quite a bit. So I'm sorry, Ryan Blaney, because that's going to be difficult for someone like Blaney. Your pit crew is going to need to be on 100% because there's going to be strategy involved in this thing, especially if we get some late cautions. Track position could be key at the very end of this thing. We see it quite a bit with this generation of car, and we can see it at Kansas as well. So I'm expecting different strategies throughout the day in this race. And now to go through some favorites and some underdogs. I already kind of named a couple of favorites there. Kyle Larson, he's won 3 races here. He's won 3 out of the last 6 or 7 races. I know he's won 2 out of the last 4. I know for a fact he's won 2 out of the last 4 races. But he's won 3 races here over the last couple of years. He's amazing at this racetrack. Could have potentially had more. Some battles with Denny Hamlin. He definitely could have had potentially more. Larson's been the best driver there the last couple of years. I talked about Christopher Bell. He's had a lot of success. He's had, I think, 7 out of the last 8 races at Kansas Speedway. He's finished 8th or better. And he also has 4 poles there. 4. He's had 4 poles there. That's pretty impressive. And then, of course, I mentioned Tyler Reddick. I wouldn't consider Kansas to be one of Tyler Reddick's best racetracks, per se. But 2311 has always looked really good here. I think over the last couple of years, they haven't been quite as good. They definitely had something figured out in that fall race for sure. Because if I remember correctly, Reddick had good speed, had some bad luck. And then Bubba Wallace looked like he was going to win the race and pretty much got taken out by his owner, Denny Hamlin, who was also going for the win. That's how Chase Elliott ended up winning that race, was because of that. So I would look at Bubba as a potential favorite as well. Of course, you got to look at Denny. Denny's won here 4 times. He's so great here. He's great pretty much anywhere we go. I also noticed when I was looking at the stats, 7 out of the last 9 races at Kansas Speedway, Denny Hamlin has finished in the top 5. So that is a very impressive stat, I would say. A couple underdogs I would probably take a look at. When I'm talking underdogs, I mean like underdogs. Like, who would expect this guy? Who would expect this guy? Honestly, one guy I would probably look at is Noah Gragson, even though it sounds kind of weird. Noah Gragson hasn't had a very successful Cup Series career, but front row looked pretty decent at Bristol. Noah Gragson was flirting with the top 10 at points in the first half of the race. Then he got a little back in traffic and just was unable to move back forward. But Noah Gragson, I look at as a driver, he can run that high lane. I can see Gragson running up that high lane. And as long as front row have provided him a good race car, I think he can compete for a top 10. I could see it. I could definitely see it. Another driver I'd probably have to take a look at would be Cole Custer. Cole Custer has had success at Kansas, so I could maybe see him being somewhat competitive. And by somewhat competitive, I mean like top 15. Honestly, those cars have been really struggling. I'm really just putting a lot of trust in Custer as a driver because I know he can get the job done, and I know he's good at this racetrack. I would actually really, probably the underdog I'm going to watch out for the most out of these underdogs is Riley Herbst. Riley Herbst has had an awful Cup Series career, and that's being nice. He hasn't had a good Cup Series career, but he looked really good in Bristol. He had really good speed. He qualified really well, and ran right outside the top 5, inside the top 10, like 70-80% of the day. I don't know what happened near the end of that race, but in that last stage, all of a sudden he was way back in the pack. And then he had his issues with Kyle Busch as well throughout the race. He ended up driving back up and still getting a top 20. I think he ended up getting a top 15 finish, if I'm not mistaken. I think he ended up getting 14th. So he ended up driving up and still getting a decent finish. And like I mentioned earlier, 23-11, and Toyota as a whole is really good at Kansas Speedway. So maybe he's able to pull something out. I don't think he's going to win. This is not me sitting here saying Riley Herbst is going to win, but I can definitely see him getting a top 10. And that would be considered a win for Riley Herbst with how his career has gone so far. And I would like to note one team I didn't mention at all there was Penske. Honestly, from what I've looked at in the stats, not even Ryan Blaney does really well at Kansas. Penske just doesn't do well at Kansas. They just don't. Logano doesn't do well there. Cindric doesn't do well there. Blaney hasn't even done very well there. And Blaney's pit crew has been god awful. So I would probably, I'm gonna say this and watch Penske win just because I'm saying this. But Penske's not gonna win this weekend. I don't see it happening. Watch them win now just because I said that though. But I just don't see Penske getting the job done this weekend. Which leads me to my weekend picks. I'm gonna give out the easy one first because I think I've picked this guy over the last couple of weeks now. I'm gonna pick Denny again. I'm getting boring with the Cup Series picks, but I'm picking Denny Hamlin again. I just have so much belief in Denny. I think this is Denny's year. I said this last year and the year before that I think it's Denny's year. This is probably one of his best, if not his best racetrack. He's had a lot of success here in the next-gen car. I'm going to pick Denny to win that race. The O'Reilly race is where it got a little bit more difficult to decide, but I did decide on Sheldon Creed. I think Sheldon Creed is going to get his second win in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series this weekend, so he's my pick to win the O'Reilly race. But I could very much see one of those Junior Motorsports cars, especially Justin Allgaier, get the win. I wouldn't count out Carson Quaffle. I really wouldn't. I was debating mainly between Quaffle and Creed. I said Creed. I was mainly debating between Quaffle and Creed, and I chose Creed, and that's my pick. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Who is your pick to win the O'Reilly Series race and the Cup Series race at Kansas Speedway? And with all that done, that'll do it for this week's edition of Larry's Trackside Teaser. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, I would appreciate a like, comment, follow, subscribe, share, do whatever you need to do. But for now, I'm Trackside Larry saying peace.